And Dave, thanks for that talk. That was just really good. Really good reminder of the fact that there's nothing out that'll come our way that is really surprises God. And if it isn't surprising to God, and He says that He has us in His hand, that's a massive comfort, right? So I appreciate you sharing that truth with us. And thanks for invite me to be a part of this morning. I just wanted to share just a small project that I had a chance to be involved in that was here in Colorado. In case you don't know me, my name is Matt Kondratief, and I'm aquatic research scientist for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I get to do work on stream habitat investigations. That's kind of the title of our research, which involves primarily fish passage and fish habitat evaluations. So this was just a little project that was done as a mitigation for some work that was done on Interstate 70. So if any of you have ever been out to Colorado and you've headed up to the ski country from out east, or if you're coming from the west, you can come through Grand Junction, but I-70 is like the main kind of highway, the main interstate that runs east-west across our state. And this little section of Clear Creek is on the east side of the Rocky Mountains. After you go through the tunnels, the Eisenhower Tunnel that's way up there near over 10,000 feet. So you go through this tunnel system. And the unfortunate thing for Clear Creek is it wound up, it shares the corridor in the bottom of this valley that runs toward Denver. And so this poor little Clear Creek has to share space with a major 4-lane interstate. And that was where a railroad also came through. So you can imagine between the real estate that was needed for space for the railroad and the Interstate 70, it didn't leave a whole lot of room for this poor little Clear Creek channel. And as a result, most of Clear Creek kind of basically was put into a very confined, kind of channelized or ditched state, channelized river. So I'm going to share a little. This project involves a place where we actually were able to do something to try to restore the channel, convert it from a single stage Rosgan F stream type to a multi-stage channel, like a B, Rosgan B type stream. And I'm going to share some of the results from the fisheries side of that conversion. So again, here's Clear Creek, picture of Clear Creek. This is a common kind of, I'd say, representative section of Clear Creek where you have as you see, that's Interstate 70 on the right side of the photo with all the traffic. And then there was an old railroad grade on the other opposite side of the highway. So typical channelized single stage channel. And if you've never been to Colorado, this little project is located about, I don't know, it's probably maybe half an hour to the west of Denver, and it's goes through this little town of Idaho Springs. And again, like I said, it was a mitigation project for a tunnel expansion. So this tiny little part of Interstate 70, it's not very long, but there's this kind of geologic bedrock feature that the highway went through, tunneled through this bedrock. And the idea of the project was to try to expand the number of lanes through this tunnel. And in doing so, there was an opportunity to do some mitigation in the area in response to the project. So as a way of offsetting some of the damage that was done. So CDOT, the Colorado Department of Transportation, approached us and they said, hey, CPW, would you guys like to be a part of this mitigation by helping us with restoring a portion of Clear Creek where the stream kind of goes away? You can see it sort of swings. So you can see in this photo, Clear Creek is flowing from left to right, so toward Denver, running down the valley. And where the stream basically departs from the highway, kind of goes away, there's a little 0.6 of a mile section there. It's not very large, but they gave us the opportunity to do some work in this section to try to offset, as a mitigation opportunity. So what we did is we went into this section of Clear Creek, and we designed some habitat restoration treatments specifically for trout. So this was for sport fish, primarily brown and rainbow trout. So some of the goals that we came up with related to the idea of how do we enhance this trout fishery, and also the other part of that was, maybe we could try to restore this to a more natural, I wouldn't say reference reach, but we're trying to restore it to something that was more of a historic condition that would have been more the original channel form. So part of that involved, okay, well, we wanted to get rid of the riprap, so we were going to remove that armored riprap from the banks. We were going to improve floodplain connectivity by converting the channel from a single to multi-stage channel and connect that stream to a active floodplain. Like I said, convert it from a single stage, meaning like that one cross section, expecting to contain all the expected range of flows that are coming down from the watershed. So we're going to convert it to a 3-stage, like a B(c) stream type. And just, this, but I gave this talk earlier to a group of folks who are primarily fish biologists, but I'll go through this real quick. But the idea behind a single stage channel, it's a one-size-fits-all channel. For the most part, you're expecting that cross section to handle, contain the majority of flood flows, all flows that coming down for the most part. So you've disconnected more or less from the original floodplain. You typically don't have a lot of riparian vegetation because you've got armoring on the banks. You've got that 3-to-1 sort of slope. Typically they have very low bed form diversity in terms of pools, riffles, and even habitat. Boulders and logs and wood are typically kind of reamed out of the channel and removed. They're great and efficient at transporting sediment and water, but there's really low storage potential in terms of the floodplain itself getting saturated or return flows from the floodplain back to the channel during the summer. You're not going to expect to see much of that. And then you have this trapezoidal geometry. So in contrast to that, what we were hoping to do was convert this back to a 3-stage channel or a B stream type. So in this case, you have the 3 stages: the low flow or inner berm channel, also known as the thalweg. So that would be the lowest elevation stage. Then nested within that cross section's nested within a bankful stage channel that corresponds to that flow that occurs on average every 2 out of 3 years, roughly. And then creating a flood-prone area or the active floodplain that would start at bankful elevation and go up from there and meet up with a terrace at a higher elevation. So that would be used more to accommodate the flood flows and allow for hopefully some riparian vegetation like willows, alders, cottonwoods to reestablish on that surface. So that leads to the next goal, was to establish riparian vegetation through the means of establishing that active floodplain, and then enhancing in-channel bed form diversity features. And functionally, we were hoping for things like improved velocity cover for trout, so creating some locations where fish could find a balance between feeding and resting, so whether that's in the form of cover or obstruction to flow like large boulders or logs or wood. Creating depth cover in the form of deep pools, and then developing hopefully some spawning areas for those trout. So we went in and we did a baseline survey of the existing kind of channel before we did any work, and came up with a plan for an approach for meeting those goals and objectives. The reach is about 0.6 of a mile long, and you notice there's a on this view you've got on the top sort of plan view, you can see the bridge that's about 2/3 of the way down through the reach. You can see where there, it says bridge. There was a bridge that bisected the project, and we had limits of disturbance around that bridge. It turned out that unfortunately we had planned to do work on this entire stretch related to those goals and objectives, but we were limited below the bridge due to sort of the geology of the system. So we ran into some bedrock features that kind of prevented us from expanding the floodplain, but also there was a house and some other infrastructure that was downstream that prevented us from really fully converting the single stage to a 3-stage. We couldn't really get a floodplain established. So it became a little experiment at that point. So because our approach had to shift and change downstream of the bridge. So instead of being able to reform or shape or excavate the floodplain, create that new floodplain downstream of the bridge, it just was going to remain as a single stage channel. And we were then going to have to just work with that and try to do what we could to enhance the habitat in spite of that constraint. So we labeled the top reach that you see from left to right, to basically from upstream to the bridge, was called the high intensity reach, because we were able to do more intensive work, such as building a new floodplain, that sort of thing. Downstream of the bridge we call the low intensity, because we were able to do minimal work in terms of any sort of floodplain development. So here's an overview in pictures. Remember, I said this is the low intensity reach. This is the downstream of the bridge. So I'm standing on that bridge looking downstream. You can see that the banks had been rip-rapped over time. There's a lot of large boulders and rock that are composed of that bank. The house on the river left, and then the geologic constraint was located downstream. There's actually an island at the far end of our site there. And that island, we thought we're like, wow, why is the river, the majority of flows on the inside of this bend as you go around that corner? Well, we found that island was there because that's a submerged piece of that. You can see that granite bedrock on the left, that the geology of this area, that's actually a part of that same formation. There's bedrock that basically is forcing that won't, it's not erodible, and so it's actually inducing the formation and maintenance of that island downstream. So this is the low intensity section, what it looked like. And then so what we ended up doing to try to enhance it was we were thinking, okay, well, what are we going to do if we can't build a floodplain? We put in a cross vein that you see in this. You can kind of see, it's hard to see, but there's that giant pool kind of in the middle of that low intensity reach, and just upstream there's a cross vein with a step. So that was our design. The yellow dots are habitat boulders we placed for velocity cover. And then down in the little side channel that was on river left of the island, that island that I showed you on the furthest downstream that you can kind of see, we developed some habitat in terms of adding large wood and creating some small step pools, and trying to create some juvenile rearing, maybe some spawning habitat as well in that like sort of side channel area to the river left. So this is what it looked like. Again, low intensity. There's that island I was referring to in the downstream portion there, and the side channel of river left. But this is what this section looked like before construction, and it was a single stage. It classified as a Rosgen F stream type with an entrenchment ratio of 1.2. So that, again, that's just the ratio of bankful, the width at bankful contrasted with twice, if you went up at a riffle, 2 times the max bankful depth at the riffle, and then took the width at that elevation, the ratio of the basically your flood prone width to bankful, it gives you an entrenchment of 1.2. And here's what it looked like after construction. So can't see real well, but there was a pool that was developed just on upstream of kind of this photo. That's where the cross vein is. But really, you notice we weren't able to do anything really to touch the banks. And it remained, after construction, still remained the same stream type, a Rosgan F with entrenchment ratio 1.2. And so not too much changed at all. We couldn't change anything in the floodplain, but we did add some habitat boulders, interspersed reach, and develop that side channel and that giant pool with a cross vein. So just to show you how that didn't change, here's a few representative cross sections taken in that low intensity reach. The cross section, like cross section 8 there on the left panel, you can see that the pink line was the pre-construction elevations and stationing, and then the black line is the post-construction. And really the point there is to show how little has changed. Like there's still, you've got the same entrenchment ratio. It still classifies the same in terms of a stream type. And then another cross section 9 downstream. You can see we're able to, the pink line again, pre-construction, black is post-construction. Notice like very little change. We just shifted the thaw wake slightly and you've got that pool now present, but not a whole lot of change at all in terms of, with the floodplain. So in terms of what we did in the low intensity reach, we added those single habitat boulders, 81 of those. I'm sorry, 81 boulders. That was 35% of the total project. Boulder structures in terms of a cross vein, we had 1 of those. There were 9 total in the project, so that's only about 10% of the project total number of structures. Boulder toe, 9%. We didn't need to do much because the banks were still rip-wrapped and armored. Pool development, we created 4 pools. Point bar development, 0%, and the big key there is no floodplain development, 0% effort in that reach. This is where it gets interesting. So given what treatments we applied, what kind of trout response, population response would you expect in an area where you didn't do any floodplain work, like to try to create a multi-stage channel? So this is a metric using brown trout density as kind of what we're measuring, which is just the number of brown trout that we estimate per mile of stream. So the purple bars are our pre-construction years of monitoring. There were 3 years of baseline data collected. Post-construction are the orange bars. That was after spring of 2015. The years are on the x-axis. And you can see there is a nice trend of increasing density of trout density, that is, in this reach. By the way, the yellow bars are 95% confidence intervals. And then those red dashed lines, that's from that's a density of a control site. So we had the benefit of having a site upstream of our project reach that has been monitored for many years, the trout population. So this is kind of what was going on in a reach that was not being manipulated a few miles upstream where we had trout data. So this is sort of serves as a control. So you can see that the background sort of, there was a slight background improvement in density over time due to factors that were outside of the construction benefits, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the control to show us, okay, so we had like a 30% increase over time, the same period of monitoring, like reach wide, like over the larger scale area of stream, we had that much increase. So that's just showing you what would be expected if you had done no work. So anything above that line is kind of what you would expect more or less, that's attributed to the habitat and restoration activities. So anyway, the bottom line is we saw about 100% increase or doubling of the trout density in that low intensity reach from that minimal amount of effort or work in that section. This is another metric we use, which is biomass. That's just the pounds of trout that we'd estimate per acre of stream surface area. So this is brown trout biomass. And what biomass is fun to look at is, instead of just asking the question, well, did we make habitat improvements that would reflect in more fish? So quantity of fish improved. It's also asking the question, did we make habitat that would benefit not just more fish, but more larger adults? So if you did work and you expect, if you see a large increase in biomass, that tells you not just did you make habitat that increased the number of fish population wise, but now you actually have more large adults or larger fish that weigh more, and they contribute to the total biomass. So it's kind of a good metric to look at in terms of if you're interested in a shift toward more large adults. So here's biomass, and you can see again, purple bars are pre-construction, orange are post. And in that low intensity reach, you can see that there was an improvement in biomass over time through before and after, the before and after period. And then the, again, red dash line is just our control reach, what the biomass was up there. It was like almost no change at all throughout the monitoring period, the same number of years, showing that biomass wasn't changing much at all in the reach. So seeing this change in this project section suggests that it was due to our construction. And in terms of what that increase was, it was about a 76% increase in biomass from before and after, comparing those before to after years. So, okay, so now we're gonna hop over to this high intensity reach where we had conversion of this single stage channel to the multi-stage B stream type. And this is what this section looked like before. A single stage with same kind of classification as downstream, trenchment of 1.2. It was classified as an F3, so boulder and cobble type of substrate. And so this is what it looked like afterwards. This was what CDOT took all this material that was originally part of the banks, and they moved it to a location. They moved it literally up the dirt, all of that dirt above the tunnels, and filled in a massive void that they had created above the tunnels to try to revegetate that area. So it was nice to have a home close by. Otherwise, I don't think we would have been able to do this project. Because what do you do to waste all of that material? So we had, again, this is that 3-stage channel. It now classifies as a Rosgan B, BC 3/2 stream type, and then trenchment ratio went from 1.2 to 2, so or a little bit over 2, right in that range. So that was good, and so I'll show you kind of the results of what the fish data look like from this type of treatment. So notice we have an active floodplain now. We have a surface where flood flows can spread out and hopefully maintain more constant or stable flows in the active channel where fish are residing during a flood. So this is a project overview of the construction. You can see again, we developed some pools through the steeper gradient reach is on the left side of this plan view. You can see from the longitudinal profile there. And then you sort of get to the corner and it sort of flattens out a little bit more as you're going through the bend. But, you know, we developed some micro pools, some boulder half veins, a boulder J-hook, and try to develop a little bit of a lateral scour pool, enhance that with that, excuse me, that J-hook. So here's another picture showing the same reach, high intensity reach before we did construction. Classic channelized reach. Here's what it looked like afterwards with that floodplain now built on both sides of the channel. And in terms of cross sections, this might tell the story better than anything. The pink lines again are the before cross sections. The black is post. In particular, here at cross section 2, you can really see how we expanded the floodplain area dramatically, gave the river a lot more room, and took out a massive amount of material. As you can see below that pink line, all that was material that we pulled out. And then the same with cross section 3 downstream. You know, that difference between the pink line and the black line on the left side of that cross section, that's all the material that was wasted and we got rid of. So in terms of high intensity, what did we do? The big point here is we put a lot more effort, more in terms of the number of boulders that were placed in this section. And obviously the point bar development and floodplain development were massively contrasted, right, with the downstream low intensity reach. So here's our data from the high intensity treatment that we did, where we built an active floodplain. Trout density is on your y-axis, and then your years on x-axis. And notice it's the same format as I shared earlier, but notice there is a little bit more of a between before and after of an relative increase in trout density in this section. And there's a nice trend of increasing density over time. So that works out to be about 182% increase in trout density, or almost a tripling of the number of fish per mile in this section from before and after. And then in terms of biomass, pounds per acre, before versus after, you can really see a dramatic shift with more trout pounds per acre of fish in the post-monitoring period. That it was very, very significant. We saw a 422% increase, or over 5 times the trout biomass in the section where we built the active floodplain. This is comparing before and after. So in conclusion, departing from natural conditions, such as channelization of rivers, has some negative consequences to fish populations that might not recover without some form of physical intervention. So really, I guess the message there, it just really has a tendency to repress the trout population, putting rivers in a channelized state and leaving them there. Restoration of channelized single-stage streams to a multi-stage channel form with a functional floodplain has the greatest potential for increasing trout biomass and density, even over just kind of doing standard habitat treatments such as J-hooks, cross veins, and adding wood. Those are all really helpful, but they really don't get at near the amount of magnitude of change you could expect if you're able to convert that single stage into a multi-stage channel form and really give the channel or flood flows a place to expand over bankful stage onto a floodplain. Channelization and loss of the floodplain connectivity have the potential for devastating impacts to wild trout populations. So that was something I forgot to mention, is that we never stocked any trout in this reach. These were all wild fish, meaning that they were basically fish that naturally reproduced in this system. There was no stocking. So all my estimates I showed with you were a result of monitoring these wild trout populations. So that's it. That's what I have. So Dave, I'll turn it back to you. If there's any questions, or we have time for questions, I'm willing to answer.
Yeah, let's open it up to questions. I have a couple questions, but I'll let other people go first. If nobody else has any questions, then I'll go. So
I just want to say that is really cool.
Thanks. Is that Gina?
It is.
Hi, Gina. Thanks. Thank you very much. I feel like, you know, this is something, if you guys have any kind of SQTs, or we have an SQT in Colorado, but for stream mitigation banking, like any type of a tool, this could be potentially, if we collect some more information on these types of projects, you know, and sort of gather more of a collection of case studies like these, it'd be really great to inform maybe like a little more detail into a performance curve for, you know, establishment of floodplain. Like, what is the benefit, right, from a biological standpoint of improving floodplain connectivity? You know, I think there's some potential here to do some, you know, it's a big incentive, right? I think it's a big incentive for us to look at, you know, how we are spending our money and resources in restoration. If one of the primary goals is to enhance fisheries, you know, maybe it's worth taking the extra step, even though it's going to be costly, of looking at, you know, there could be a massive benefit from taking the time to do a little bit of floodplain restoration instead of just like, you know, I don't know if we should do that. Maybe we just need to put some more habitat in the stream and leave it as a single stage channel.
Yeah, and you know, the results from, I'm glad you analyzed those separately because the results on both were just incredible. Unfortunately, Oklahoma is a black hole for things like this, but my husband works for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I've been keeping him informed as you've gone through your talk. And so maybe somewhere between the two of these things, we can get Oklahoma to actually do something, maybe kind of, sort of.
Yeah. Well, if you can always reach out to me if if you're interested in this talk. I'm willing to share it with you. You know, if you want a copy, whatever, just let me know.
I would absolutely love a copy. So yeah, that would be absolutely wonderful. And then I can just hand it over to my husband too. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Hey, Matt, this is Alan Walker. Really appreciate that great talk. I'm interested in also getting a copy. I would like to maybe see your difference in pool depths and some of that the data that supports that nice increase in the fish population. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Good to hear from you, Alan. It's been a little while.
It has. We need to get together again soon, no doubt.
I hope so. I was meaning to get to that Nashville stream restoration conference meeting. I know we all were, and
yeah.
Unfortunately that with COVID and everything, it got shut down.
We'll try to make that happen again, no doubt. Appreciate it.
Yes. No, thanks. Yeah, I will share this presentation with Dave afterwards if you want, Dave, and then you can, anybody, if I don't have their contacts, Dave, if that's okay, and
I'll just distribute it. Yep.
That'd be great. Okay.
Super. Thank you.
You're welcome, Alan.
Matt, I have a question related to so even with not doing floodplain connection, not all enhancements are created equal. So this enhancement, I'm assuming you guys had done a limiting factors analysis and decided where to place habitat features. Do you have any thoughts or comments on how practitioners could kind of lay out designs in the future to kind of add to this type of research, or kind of continue or grow or expand upon this type of research?
Yeah, that's a good question, Dave. On one level, I think that it's important that we have a lot of examples of channelized rivers and the impacts from channelized rivers on trout populations. I found a report in Montana that was from the 1950s or 60s that they did an inventory of streams where they kind of tried to do paired watersheds and looking at channelized versus non-channelized areas and differences in trout populations. So I know that this isn't really anything new. Like, in other words, like we've been documenting impacts to trout populations just from the change in channel form conversion to single stage channels. But what I do think is interesting, Dave, is like you were saying, is like, what can we gain from, there are a lot of places that I've learned, and you have too, I'm sure, all of you, where we're just constrained. Like, what do we do if you've got a floodplain that's adjacent, you've got homes built up on a floodplain that now, is, you can't reconnect to that original floodplain. You can't get it back. So what are we left with? What are our alternatives? And I do want to point out that we did see an increase, as you saw, an improvement in spite of the fact that we weren't able to build an active, a functional floodplain in that lower section. So, I don't want to downplay that. I just mainly was trying to show that, like, there was the magnitude of increase was much greater where if we could potentially do something to create an active floodplain. But I think part of it, Dave, is like, I really think there's a need to start us networking in the sense of, like, if there's a biologist who's got a similar project that you see here, where there's an opportunity, or you're involved in a project and can work with somebody to try to collect monitoring data, it's so important that we build a case. Like, I have this nice little tight little neat little case study, but it's only one case study. And if we end up with 5 or 6 of these that are all showing the same things from the Midwest to the Rockies, whatever, out west, East Coast, where we have this documented shift or change, it really helps build the momentum and the case for, yeah, this isn't just some like isolated little case study where this unique little situation occurred, but there's more momentum to say, yeah, this really is important. And not only should we consider, channelizing rivers, massively detrimental, or the major, has a potential for massive detriment to the trout population or any fish population that way, but maybe also the incentive to do something in terms of restoration that would, although it might add additional cost, it could be really beneficial and have huge gains, right, for fisheries. So anyway, answering your question, I think it's partly collecting more case studies that would build from other regions across the U.S. or Canada, and then also in terms of the way that habitat, the habitat that we placed, where we place boulders, the position of structures. We tried to do something that obviously that we were working in line with the tendency of the river. So looking at pool to pool spacing and where we would place, for instance, cross veins or J hooks in relation to the pattern of the river and bankful and those kind of dimensionless relationships. That was part of it. But then, yeah, in terms of what you're saying, Dave, in terms of habitat and how we placed it, looking at, for instance, the side channels as juvenile rearing habitat, those are places that are typically shallower water habitats, but those juveniles have sort of a refuge from large predators, right? The bigger trout that would normally eat them, they tend to not like getting into more of those shallow habitats. So part of it's just recognizing what we have in terms of function and how we can sort of maximize the function for different life stages based on kind of the cards that were dealt. And so, yeah, I'm not sure, Dave, quite how to answer you on that, but it's a little bit of creative thinking, and it's trying to like consider what your limitations are, but how can you still make some lemonade out of these lemons if you kind of are restricted in terms of what you're able to accomplish project wise. And so it's sort of a balance between, hey, we've got this little side channel, we can't really make anything deep here because the bedrock is confining us vertically, but we could add some wood to this channel, accept the fact it's going to be shallow, and make this really focus on how we make this the best it can be for juvenile fish. I don't know if that's helping answer the question, Dave, or not, but those are just two things that come to mind from what you were saying.
Yeah, I think it does help. I mean, and the real question was kind of related to the ideas. Do I just add wood to get this fish response? Do I just put in a big structure to put in this fish response? And I know that we don't have the answers to that yet, but it's just a matter of how do we kind of move forward in that direction in the future. And I think that gives some direction without giving answers.
Yeah, there's still so many questions, I think. And when it comes to us still sorting out, like you said, Dave, like alternative selection, right? Like I'm thinking of an MCDA, and we've got, we could put a lot of money and effort and resources into wood type treatments versus, we could go with and get certain function versus we make it out of boulders or some hybrid between the two. And we still don't really fully understand like the balance between them. And that's where I think a reference reach, we'll never be able to avoid the reference reach is still our guide in the sense of like looking at those healthier streams where we still have some healthy type high functioning streams, and looking at what sort of fisheries response or fish population dynamics characteristics are there in those reference sites that guide us to like sorting through these alternatives. So I still am a firm believer in the reference reach as a guide, but you're right. I don't know how to, we're still trying to figure that out. Like it varies so much. It's complicated by life stage, by species. Rainbow trout really like bolder, higher velocity water, not so keen on the depths, aren't quite as critical in terms of really deep pools. Whereas brown trout, we know if we want to really maximize their habitat, we've seen massive response from using large wood and complex root wads on lateral scour pools, more sluggish, deep water with that complex cover. And we're seeing massive response in brown trout. So really different in terms of rainbows and browns, but still very hard to sort out, especially by life stage with juvenile browns, juvenile rainbows. It's still, I would say, we haven't really got that sorted out great,
Well, hey, thanks everybody for being on the line today. As long as Matt wants to stay on the line, we'll let anybody stay on and kind of continue to ask questions. But I wanted to give an opening for people that have something planned at 9 o'clock to be able to get off. So I appreciate it and have a great week, guys.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Matt.
You're
Good seeing
welcome.
you.
Hey, I've got a question for Matt. This is Rich. Good. Hang out for a second.
Yeah, I'm still here. Yeah.
Hey, this is Rich Berkeley. A few years ago, you presented on the aftermath of the floods and the decimation of trout populations. I was wondering if you're still monitoring those sections and if they've recovered.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can tell you, like, for instance, on the Big Thompson River, that was one of the places that we were looking at where the emergency response to the flood, you might have seen in my presentation today, that was the slide that I showed for a representative, like, single stage channel with that trapezoidal banks and stuff. That was from the Big Thompson. That's one of the places we've been monitoring. And I can report with good news that there was enough money from, I'm not real clear on where the money came from, all the sources, but we were able to go in and do remove those riprap banks and create a multi-stage channel, go back and replace boulders that had been removed in order to accommodate the emergency work that was done essentially to channelize the river while the road was being reconstructed. So there has been restoration in the large majority of the Big Thompson, in the sense of at least getting rid of those riprap banks and converting it back to like a multi-stage type of channel with a active floodplain. So that's one section that I know has been undergone restoration. So that's good news. And we have started to see a shift, an improvement in the wild trout populations there. Talking to the biologist, I haven't seen his latest monitoring data, but to answer your question, yes, we are continuing to monitor those sites, and in places where they've gone and essentially, converted the channel that was sort of channelized and more or less, in response to the emergency work and the flood, where we've been able to get back in there and restore it back to a multi-stage channel with floodplain. We're seeing a real positive response overall, for the most part, from discussions with our biologists, and that monitoring is continuing. So yeah, maybe down the road we'll have another presentation that that puts all of that together, right? The whole transition. But the challenge still is there are places where the river,